seeing that at 6 o'clock. With that, that's about my only action as chair for our budget committee right now, because we need to go into electing new officers. Jordan, can you kind of maybe take us through the process of how we should kind of get this going?
Yeah, so good evening, Mayor, I should say, Budget Committee and outgoing Budget Committee Chair. So tonight we thought what we would do, Tyler and I would do a overview of basically what is local government budgeting. I know a lot of you have a lot of background in this and have done this before, but we do have new members, and it's been 2 years since we last did this. And with the new members and new counselors, we thought it would be a good opportunity, one, to meet and greet and get to know each other. And so I thought maybe we could do introductions here at the beginning. But as the mayor alluded to, we need first have an order of business of electing a chair and vice chair, who would be the presiding officer over the budget committee members meetings this spring. And then the vice chair would be the presiding officer if the chair, couldn't attend one of the meetings. But tonight on the agenda, Tyler and I were just going to go through kind of what is a budget, how do we do the budget, what's the budget process, the role of the budget committee, talk a little bit about the budget document and the format of the document. So we have this background going into the meeting in April when we present the budget message and start doing the presentation of the budget. And then it's also an opportunity here in this hour to maybe get some initial questions out of the way and just, kind of the basics, and talk about the proposed schedule. And if there's any, maybe agenda topics or ways that you would like us to focus when we present the budget in April and May, it'll be good to get that input at this time. Legally, we're not supposed to talk about the specific numbers of the budget. Obviously, we're still preparing internally the budget and putting it together, all the worksheets and narratives and things like that. So we don't really have those answers yet. Anyways, I mean, we've started, revenue projections and things like that. But so the purpose of tonight is not to talk about the next biennial budget, but more of the structure of the process and the things I mentioned before. So Jeff, I do think we should probably do roll call first off, and then seek nominations for the chair and vice chair.
Absolutely. So we'll just take a quick roll. We'll start with the budget committee members themselves. Let me also apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. My apologies. But we'll start with Mr. Van Gent.
Present.
Ms. Lee.
Present.
Ms. Malone. Mr. Myron.
Present.
Mr. Huber.
Here.
And Mr. Phipps, I believe, is not present.
Don't see him.
Okay. And then Councillor Pietzel.
Here.
Councillor Smallwood.
Yes.
Councillor Sheldon.
Here.
Councillor Walker.
Here.
Councillor Exner.
Here.
Councillor Hokinson.
Here.
Mayor Pulliam.
Here.
I could add one item. We did have a 7th budget committee member who resigned from their position on Friday evening. Obviously, now that we're at this point in the game, it's a little too late to go through another recruitment process. So we'll just move forward with 6 appointed budget committee members at this point in time.
Great.
Thank you, Tyler. I was gonna mention that too. We were missing one, and that's right.
Sorry, I cut in front of you.
Yeah, that's okay. Great. So first order of business, I think that maybe the process and maybe the easiest way is to seek nominations for chair or vice chair. And then it would just be, a majority of vote of the body to appoint the chair, and then do the same thing for the vice chair, nominate, and a majority vote.
I'll make a nomination. I'll nominate Lori Smallwood just because she doesn't know I'm going to nominate her.
Fooled you.
I'd nominate Don Hokinson.
Do we need to second people?
I'll second Don's nomination.
And I'll second Lori.
Okay, so we'll take a vote on one on each of those. So this would be for chair. The first nomination was for Councillor Lori Smallwood. Probably should do a roll call for a tally. Sorry, Jeff.
Sure. And then Jordan, so if they both pass, then what happens in that instance?
We haven't done this in a while.
What is it meant by pass? Can you explain?
If it's a split.
Oh, I see.
Well,
Okay. I misunderstood you, Jordan.
Yeah,
Okay, that works.
sorry. With
So you
two,
vote for
with
one or the other.
two, sorry, with two nominations, I should clarify. It's of majority, and if the body's okay with this, the person with the most votes would win.
I have a question too. In the past, and like you say, this is 12 years in the past, the budget chair was always someone who was not a member of the city council. But since both of the nominees are on the city council, that's sort of moot. It was usually a member of the public at large that was the chair, but both our nominees are on the council, so those are what we've got.
Mayor, I don't know who's in charge today, I guess. Mayor?
no one is right now.
I know when we did school board, it was the same way. It was always the non-council would chair the meeting. But Jordan, is this the past history been the council that anybody can share?
Yeah, I'd say in the past, I've been the chair before. Other non-councilors have been the chair. It's kind of gone back and forth. I mean, it's not the sexiest job in the world.
Can I nominate Linda Malone for chair?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Do all those who were nominated, do they accept the nomination?
It's a good question.
Sure. It's only going to be about 3 meetings, right? Just kidding.
I would like to decline.
Okay, so Councillor Hokanson declines. So we have Councillor Smallwood and Linda Malone as the nominees. Jordan, would you like me to go ahead and take a vote at this point?
Yep.
Okay. Hearing no objections. Okay, we'll just go down the list. Mr. Van Gent.
Linda Malone.
Ms. Lee.
Laurie Smallwood.
Ms. Malone.
Well, I guess since I didn't decline it, I'll vote for myself.
Mr. Myram.
Laurie Smallwood.
Mr. Huber.
Linda Malone.
Councillor Pietzold.
Linda, please.
Councillor Smallwood.
I'll abstain.
Councillor Sheldon.
Linda Malone, please.
Councillor Walker.
Linda Malone.
Councillor Exner.
Councilor Smallwood.
Councillor Hokanson.
Linda, please.
Mayor Pulliam.
I'll go with Councilor Smallwood. I should as a nominator.
Linda Malone received 7 votes and Councillor Smallwood received 4 votes.
Congratulations, someone. Congratulations. You get the
Thanks, Don.
virtual gavel.
And I'd like to nominate Laurie Smallwood for vice chair.
Second.
Second that.
I'll second that.
There we go.
Actually, Linda should be running this now, right?
That's what I was going to say.
Come on, Linda, get us organized.
In that case, are there any other nominations for vice chair? Hearing none, I'll ask for unanimous consent to name Laurie Smallwood as vice chair.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, make it
It's
so.
a little bit like getting picked for kickball in P class.
Yeah.
Not quite. You got picked twice. So now we turn it over to, I don't know, Jordan, are you going to run it or is Tyler going to run the actual?
I'll kick us off. We'll make your job easy tonight, committee member or chair Malone. You're off the hook for the rest of the night. We can wrap it up.
I
But
was told it would be an hour, and so, you know.
that's right. Well, thank you. So like I said, tonight, our agenda, I think, Tyler, you could probably start screen sharing our presentation. I think there's a copy of the presentation in the agenda packet. Very kind of simple slides just to kind of guide us in this conversation tonight. But we did want to go over what is, the city budget and what is a budget, kind of the basics to get everybody on the same footing in terms of terminology and sort of the purpose of why we're here. Touch on the role of the budget committee, what is the role of this body and what does that process look like and what comes after. So we'll talk about the budget process and the budget committee. We'll talk more about the budget document itself and the city of Sandy's budget approach, because it is unique. And so it's good to have that sort of, comments and explanation up front, because that kind of helps with questions as we go into the actual proposed budget and the presentation of the budget. And so we'll go and talk a little bit more about what is expenditure control budgeting and what does that look like and how do we budget general revenue and those things. So I think that's again, important foundation to have. We'll touch on kind of the main, things that we look for in a budget: resources and requirements, or revenues and expenses, and the major categories of those. See if we have any questions about the budget format and the budget document. And then again, we'd like to get your input on the schedule and agenda topics and sort of the presentation of the budget, in terms of maybe departments doing their presentations on the night of the budget presentation. And then we do want to make sure we have the Sandy Urban Renewal Agency budget presented there in the middle of the proceedings too. So Tyler, let's go ahead and we've done our budget committee chair and vice chair. Congratulations, Chair Malone, Vice Chair Smallwood. Tyler, I'll go ahead and flip it over to you to start talking about the budget. And I think what we're going to end up doing is just tag teaming, talking about things back and forth, and answer questions together. But please feel free to ask questions anytime throughout this. If there's terminology that we use, or you have a question about something that we said, please just raise your hand, or if you can figure out how to use that function, the raise hand function on Zoom, that's helpful too. And maybe Jeff can keep an eye on that. If we're focused on the slide presentations. Next slide.
Oh, there we go. All right. Ready for me, Jordan?
Yep.
Okay. So what is a budget? A budget is an estimate of revenue and expenses for a set period of time. The city of Sandy operates on a 2-year budget known as a biennial budget. With the first fiscal year starting July 1st of 2021, running through June 30th of 2023. More importantly though, a budget is the city's financial plan that outlines what the government sources and uses of funds will be. This is what most people think about in terms of government budget, but it also serves as a policy document communicating the council's goals and priorities for the upcoming biennium, as well as a form of control through setting limits of spending. Anything beyond the limits that are approved by the council ultimately need to be revisited by the governing body before we can expend those funds. And so the budget committee it plays a vital role in the budget process. First and foremost, this meeting tonight to set the groundwork, followed by our first formal budget hearing, which will include receiving the proposed budget, receiving the budget message from the budget officer, who is the city manager. We'll go through each of the department budgets and provide the budget committee with information on each, and then receive public comment. Members of the public are obviously always encouraged at all of our meetings, whether that's a council meeting or a budget committee meeting. So we encourage members to provide their feedback along the way. And then the budget committee will discuss and revise the budget as needed. Discuss and ask clarifying questions. If there is different priorities or directions set throughout that process, we can revise the budget as indicated by the committee. And then ultimately the budget committee will approve the proposed budget and also approve the property tax rate. See, the budget process is broken into numerous steps. The first step is council goal setting, which took place in January and February of this year. Council met believe 3 times to discuss sort of the vision for the city of Sandy and set priorities and goals for the upcoming biennium. And as Jordan already indicated, we have begun the budget preparation process internally. So revenue projections, just now working on expenditures with various department heads to get those documents finalized. And we'll continue to work on that through the first couple weeks of April, compiling the proposed budget document, which includes the budget message, various information on trends and future projections for capital expenditures, debt, etc., like that. And then we will deliver the budget message, deliver the proposed budget document. And as already mentioned, you'll review and approve the budget. Once the budget committee approves the budget, it goes before the city council to formally adopt the budget. And then effective July 1, the budget is implemented and we begin the internal budget management process and continual communication with council on expenditures, revenues, and project updates.
As city council, I should just add, after the budget committee does approve the budget, it goes to the city council for adoption. There's another public hearing and actually more than just one public hearing for that adoption process. The city council can change the budget by renoticing and having that public hearing. And then throughout the year, as part of the budget management, or actually throughout the biennium, changes to the budget are not uncommon. There's things like resolution transfers, where we can transfer resources between departments or their supplemental budgets, where if it exceeds a certain amount within a fund, we have to hold a public hearing and the council has to have that public hearing and to make that change. So there's ways to manage as after the budget's adopted with the 2-year budget, changes do happen. And sometimes you need to use contingency or reserves or something, or there's new revenue that comes in that we want to account for. So that's another feature of sort of the budget management process after adoption.
The budget committee itself is the one that sets the millage rate. That doesn't change once it goes to the council, right?
That's right. That's right.
Any other questions at this point? While we're here.
In this last year, were there any changes made to what was presented at the budget meeting?
There were no supplemental budgets for the first year of the biennium. We're currently in the second year of the biennium, and we will likely need to do a supplemental budget before the end of the fiscal year. We've had some impacts due to COVID, which I'm sure you can all understand, unforeseen expenditures as well as revenue. And so there will be some modifications that need to happen before the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
All right, moving on. So the budget management approach. The city of Sandy is unique in our budget approach, and we implement something we call expenditure controlled budgeting, which essentially allows for general fund departments to have the same authority and control over their budgets as enterprise or proprietary funds like water and sewer departments. We also budget to the bottom line, so we're less concerned with individual line item expenses and more concerned with an overall budget authority for each department or program, allowing those directors that are in place to manage and run their departments with the utmost, with them having the utmost knowledge of how to function and run their department. We give them the authority to do so. This also is unique in that it allows for departments to manage their own revenues and expenditures and carry over and retain any budgetary savings that they have. Many other cities have a sort of use it or lose it policy, in that they allocate funds. If they're not all used, then they are absorbed back into the general fund or whatever appropriate fund that is. We allow for our departments to carry forward their savings for either long-term goals, one-time purchases to aid in, more efficient processes, etc. So it's a little bit unique. I think there's only 2 or 3 other cities that really implement this in its true nature, and we are one of those. It's been a long-standing tradition here in Sandy to operate in this way. I did see a couple of hands though just now.
It was started, I think, under Scott Lasmy, maybe his first or second year as city manager, because we did have that the council questioned the use it or lose it scenario, because it made for people purchasing stuff near the end of the budget year just to not necessarily stuff they needed right then, but they wanted to keep a hold of their funds. And this made it to where they use clearer heads in deciding purchasing within departments. So yeah, it's been going on 25, 30 years. It's been going on a long time.
It does disincentivize the budget games that can be played with buying new laptops for everyone in May because your expenses are going to run out.
There's a lot of different games that are played in your traditional budget process that going through this process eliminates. I think the use it or lose it is one of the best. The other one is to the second bullet here on carryovers. We explicitly just put a line in each department for contingency. If you don't have a budget that has departments that are allowed a contingency for smoothing, for example, or save up for capital, or other one-time expenses that they know of in the future, what often happens is you get departments padding line items, or putting contingencies throughout their budget or hiding money and that sort of thing. And so you have to go through this process of having multiple meetings with different departments to figure out where the money's hidden. So we're very explicit. Here it is. Here's what they have left over. This is how they're using it. And then you get in situations which we've, have kind of, been in the cycle of having to use carryover to kind of smooth out operating expenses as costs, continue to rise for, personnel and things like that. Other questions? I can't see everybody, unfortunately, with this. So just speak up, I guess, would be easier if you have questions.
We do have a hand up, Chair Malone, I think from Jan Lee.
Oh, as soon as you said that, I forgot my question. I'll think of it later.
So just to piggyback off of what Jordan had just mentioned, part of this process also is a general revenue allocation. So all of our general revenue is recorded into one department. General revenue generally consists of property taxes, franchise fees, and other revenue. And then we allocate that to derivatives departments. And those departments actually show a general revenue transfer as a resource within their individual budget, which is unique from other budgeting methods as well. And because of that, we also have a specific line for fees for services. Since my internet is unstable, so hopefully I'm not.
You're just a little fuzzy.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
There. Okay. Sorry. We also have a line item for fees for services, and so we actually show the true cost of providing administrative services to direct service departments. So we have a transfer out, which helps fund the administration department, finance, legal, and a handful of other small departments for the true cost of providing those services. So we essentially treat every department like their own individual business, for lack of a better word, with their own revenue sources and expenditures. And moving on to the next slide, our budget structure. So we have a large number of funds. Each fund serves its own purpose. The most well-known fund, important fund, and that houses all of the departments that provide direct services for the city that are sort of a general government responsibility. So police, administration, recreation, senior services, parks, IT, admin, finance, etc. Within each fund, there is an organizational unit, and that's the departments that I just mentioned. And within each department, there's objective or object classification. So personnel services, which is all of the salary and related benefits, materials and services like supplies and contractual services. And those examples that I just provided are the specific line items. So they all kind of feed up into this one larger fund, which is self-balancing. So revenues have to equal expenditures. We would not be in compliance with Oregon budget law if we did not have a balanced budget and balancing funds. And then from there, we monitor each fund to ensure that they stay in balance and stay stable. So the general fund has a variety of income streams. Many of the other funds have a smaller income stream, or revenue source rather. For example, in the water fund, it's just charges for services as opposed to, you know, a variety of different resources for a larger fund like the general fund. Here's a listing of all of our funds. I'll briefly just touch on each of these so you kind of have a little bit of a background. General fund has all of those general operating departments that we just talked about. The street fund has a dedicated revenue source of gas taxes, and so that is held in a special revenue fund, as well as the transit department or transit fund with their dedicated payroll tax to help fund their operations. We also have the recreation, aquatic and recreation center fund, which houses or is responsible for maintaining all the expenditures related to the Sandy Community Campus. We have a full faith and credit debt service fund, which essentially just takes in money to pay out debt service payments annually. Our Parks Capital Project Fund, which houses all of the revenue and expenditures related to purchasing new land for parks, as well as constructing new parks. And then we have our water, sewer bond reserve fund, and stormwater and telecommunications. These all act as enterprise or proprietary funds. They're essentially a business under the city's name with charges for services as their main revenue source, and then obviously the operations of maintaining those services. And we have an operations internal service fund, which is the main source of funding and the management of the operations center down off of Champion Way. And then our facilities maintenance internal service fund, which is sort of a unique fund. It basically holds money that we set aside each year for future improvements to various buildings throughout the city. We just underwent during this biennium a very large facilities assessment to get an accurate update on what's the condition of all of our facilities and where we need to prioritize those funds. And so that will be something we talk about probably later on in the budget process. And our standard budget format. So you'll see in the budget document, once that's prepared and delivered, this type of format throughout in numerous places. On the left, we have the first column, which houses or maintains the resources and the different groups of resources that we have and requirements and the different groups of requirements that we have. And then we also show the prior two bienniums actuals. So from fiscal year, or from July 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2017, actual data, July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2019, actual data, the current budget that we're operating under now, and then the proposed budget for the upcoming biennium. As Jordan mentioned, we can't really discuss budget specific information for the upcoming biennium just yet, so these are made up numbers, so don't hold your breath or get too in the weeds with these biennium 21-23 numbers that you see here.
So Tyler, I recall my question, it was about loans between the departments. Will that show as a line item in interagency transfers in some way?
So that actually shows up as debt service. Now, since the loan has already been issued and the transfer been completed when the loan agreement was executed, that shows now as a debt service for the fund or department paying back the debt. And then it shows under, I believe, miscellaneous revenue. I'd have to double check that because now I'm going blank for the receiving fund. And for those of you who aren't aware of what committee member Lee is talking about, we do have two interfund loans from the transit department to our police department and our SandyNet or telecommunications fund. To help offset some expenses that were incurred, I believe 3 years ago now. And so those are 10-year loans. We're working on getting those repaid as quickly as possible, but we will have a detailed graph, committee member Lee, in the budget document that shows where we're at with payments. And so that will be clearly identified in the overall document, what's outstanding and what the timeline and schedule for that is. And then just after in the budget document, that sort of summary screenshot that you just saw, we do also have a more detailed listing by account number. So same sort of concept, you have resources on top, requirements on bottom. the same grouping of prior biennium actuals and budgeted numbers, but this just breaks it out line by line. So there is the level of detail that community members would like to see, or the council or budget committee might like to see. How much are we spending on office equipment, or how much are we spending on salaries? And so that information will be available to you as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So for something like parks and recreation, you know, a lot of that's funded out of the general fund. But for example, parks probably get some money from renting the house out at Bornstead and renting the gazebo or classes or things like that. So is it, when you have kind of this multi-funded source of revenue, whether it's SDCs and general fund money and money coming in from rent and all these things, are you able to see that in one pack, you know, one kind of sheet there for a department kind of thing?
Yep. So we will have a description like this that you're seeing on this slide for each department. So for the parks maintenance department that you just mentioned, you'd see something very similar to this with a beginning balance, a charges for services or fees for services, which would include the rental of that property in Bornstead Park, and then the general revenue. So you'll be able to see department by department, the different revenue categories coming in and the different expenditure categories going out.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else while we're here? I can only see a couple of you, so hearing none, I'm going to go to the next slide. So resources and revenues, you'll see these terms sort of used interchangeably depending on which page of the budget document you're on, but they mean the same thing. It's money coming into the city. The first item, beginning fund balances or your carry forward. So that's the money that's not spent in the current biennium that rolls forward into the next biennium, all shows up as a beginning balance. Property taxes, a very important part of our general revenue collection process, makes up a large portion of the general revenue proceeds that we do get. And then there's utility rates and fees. So again, those are those charges for services like water, sewer, stormwater, telecommunication. And then fees would be, you know, recreation fees or fees for senior trips or other items like that. Grants also provide a nice stable revenue stream for some of our departments, the transit department being the largest recipient of those grants. And then state shared revenues, which include, you know, cigarette tax and liquor tax and general Oregon revenue sharing. Because we do not allow dispensaries in town, the city of Sandy does not receive marijuana tax proceeds. We did get a lump sum a number of years ago when marijuana sales first became legal, but that is not an ongoing revenue source that you would see moving forward. And here is a capture of what our current biennium budgeted resources look like. So keep in mind, this is just budget, this is not actuals, but you can see beginning balances make up a large portion of our financial picture. Property taxes, just over $7 million for the biennium. Franchise fees, and then fines, fees, and assessments. So a large portion of the proceeds that we receive are from fines, fees, and assessments. We do have some intergovernmental revenue that one of the large sources of that is the library district funding that goes directly to the library to pay for their operations. Interest is a small category, grants, transfers, loan proceeds. So anytime we receive loan proceeds, we record those separately and track that separately. Miscellaneous revenue is a very small percentage. We are able to tag most of our revenue to other categories. Indirect service revenue, I touched on this a little bit previously. This is the revenue that indirect departments like finance, administration, legal, the revenue that they receive from other departments. And then the general revenue, which is the revenue that is directly allocated out to direct service departments. Essentially what happens, because we allocate revenue from the general fund to the various departments, either in general fund or services outside of the general fund, we inflate our budget slightly. The expenditure controlled budgeting model does cause the budget to be slightly inflated because of those transfers that happen within the general fund. Other, budgeting techniques would essentially not transfer that general revenue from one department to other departments, and it would just authorize a certain level of expenditures for departments like police or admin or recreation. And so we do have a slight inflation that happens in our budget, but that's sort of the cost of having a budget that really captures the true cost of doing business for those departments.
Tyler, can you kind of clarify a little bit on that fine fees and assessments? Are we getting that much in library fines?
No, so I wish that Sarah McIntyre would be very happy to see that. That fines, fees, and assessment includes utility charges. It does include, late fees or damaged book fees for the library, but most notably, the largest is utility rates, traffic citations, and then all the other little stuff just adds up, recreation fees, senior service or senior trip fees, library fees. But the largest category within that is the utility rates.
Yeah, for sure the utility fees are especially with, the rates that have gone up for sewer, but then SDCs, I believe, are in there too. So that's.
Oh, thank you, Jordan. Yes.
These are fake numbers though, right?
These are the current budgeted numbers. So these are the real numbers we have in our 1921 budget.
Thank you.
Moving on.
Right. So on the flip side, requirements and expenditures, they're broken down into various categories. The first is personnel services. That includes salaries, insurance benefits, PERS, FICA taxes, anything having to do with personnel is rolled up into a personnel services category. The next category, it would be materials and services. And so that's all of our contracts, supplies, professional services, equipment, monthly utilities for natural gas or water. All of those fall into that materials and services category. Next is debt service, and that's the repayment of interest and principal on our loans and bonds, followed by transfers, capital outlay, and contingency. Transfers are pretty much anything that happens from one fund to another, or from one department to another. And then capital outlay would be anything over $5,000 with a useful life over 1 year that ends up being capitalized and is part of our fixed asset accounting. And then contingencies, last but certainly not least, is where we budget essentially any sort of reserve for a rainy day or future purchases. Like Jordan mentioned earlier, we do have a contingency line within each department. And so each department has the opportunity to have some contingency set aside for unforeseen expenditures or, long-term planning for purchasing a new vehicle, for example, or new office furniture or something like that.
Hey, Tyler?
And you'll also see, yes.
Sorry. I take it you have intergovernmental transfers for like 911 call center. Is that correct?
So we pay Clackamas County monthly for our dispatch services. We don't have a call center locally or receive the 911 state shared revenue.
Where is that stored at in these expenditures?
That would show up in materials and services within the police department.
And we also have a hand up from Councilor Exner.
Yeah, I was just going to wait until my turn.
Turn.
There it is. Okay. I know we got some cap on some of our debt load and those kinds of things. Will you discuss that at the next full meeting, or is that something we could talk about here? But I'd like to find out where our debt load is and how that affects any future debt.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, so we can certainly discuss that in more depth during the actual budget process. But what I can say offhand is that our general obligation debt is limited to 3% of our assessed value. We're not currently anywhere near that number, but we can get a better answer, more detailed answer for you, Councilor Exner, as we move on.
Sure. Just whenever we get to our meetings, I'm just curious how close we are.
Sure thing. And then last but not least on this slide, oh, heard someone else.
I was just going to add, Tyler, sorry. As we look at these categories, we often talk about the operating budget versus a capital budget, and the distinction between those two. And basically thinking of an operating budget as the, what it takes to do the day-to-day stuff, keeping the government open and running. So personnel, materials, long-term debt service, because that's something we have to pay every year for multiple years, and then transfers. And then the capital budget is those big expenses, the big projects, purchases of expensive equipment and things that are more year to year and funded through not necessarily ongoing revenue as much as maybe bonds and other debt, reserves that you build up to pay for those big projects. So we try to summarize that and highlight that when we do the budget, because all those other things that we've talked about in terms of inflation of numbers through transfers and general revenue allocations, it's nicer to get back to the core number of what does it cost, per year, per biennium to run the government, and then what's the capital budget? How much are we spending on improvements and doing new things and maintaining what we have in terms of infrastructure and equipment. So just wanted to make that highlight, because that will be something that's in the budget summaries too.
You beat me to it. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that was a more concise.
I should have let you go.
So moving on, same sort of screenshot, this time depicting our current biennium 1921 requirements. Personnel services makes up a large percentage, nearly a quarter of all of our expenditures. Materials and services are, right behind there. Capital outlay is higher in the current biennium than it has been in the past, but that's due to initial sewer improvements that were budgeted for this biennium, and that number is sure to grow in the upcoming biennium and the biennium after that. Debt service is pretty stable, but that number will likely also grow going forward, given that we'll have some new debt that needs to be repaid for the sewer or wastewater treatment plant. We also have transfers. Again, this number is slightly inflated because of the intra-fund transfers that happen within the general fund to those other general fund departments. We have a reserve for future use category. This is the balance of the funds that are sitting currently in the sewer bond reserve fund. The intent for those funds is to pay off the existing debt that we have with USDA early. And so it's not reserved for fund future use, it's reserved for early retirement of existing debt. And then contingency at just over 7 million. And so if there's any questions about what we've gone over so far, I'm welcome to take those now, and then we can move on to the proposed schedule and other questions.
See any?
Noah just unmuted himself. I'm not sure.
No. So I work for the City of Portland Budget Office, and we have a soft value for projected CARES money that's coming in. Do you guys have, the City of Sandy have that? Any kind of projection for that yet?
Did you say CARES funding?
Yeah, for the new CARES.
Yeah. So I don't have any projected numbers for what we'll see later this fiscal year or next biennium. We did receive about $350,000 in the current biennium. We've spent nearly all of that. We only have a couple $1,000s left. We've received, reimbursement along the way, and so that's been very helpful in offsetting the expenditures related to COVID and our response to COVID. But more would be helpful, especially if we were to see some revenue replacement funds in the proposed stimulus package. That would be very helpful for some of the departments that have been closed for a number of months and not providing services to the public. So if there is better information that we get, I assume you probably have maybe more better projecting tools, with being the largest city in the state and receiving much more revenue in some of these programs than we have. But if we do get better numbers or better estimates, we'll definitely include that as we go throughout the budget process.
Right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler,
Yes.
what is the process for changing the 1921 budget as you suggested that needs to happen as compared to what we're doing for the
Yeah,
new?
so if it's less than 5%, the changes can just be adopted at a regularly scheduled council meeting.
Okay.
If it's between 5 and 10%, we do need to notice, have a budget hearing. I don't have dollar figures, calculated for that yet to see where we're at. But it will be included. There will be a staff report and included in a normal council agenda, no matter what the threshold is. And if there is a noticing requirement, we'll notice that in the Sandy Post and on Facebook typically is how we take care of those public noticing requirements.
And if the budget committee is involved, will that be this committee or the previous committee?
We have not typically on these sort of minor supplemental budgets included the budget committee, but in recent years, we've had a really difficult time keeping a budget committee intact with people moving in and out of the city or not having a fully functioning committee in the first place. So we'll evaluate what the thresholds are, where we are at, and who needs to be involved as we move forward.
Thank you.
Maybe another way to answer it, there's nothing statutorily that says that the budget committee is involved with budget resolution transfers or supplemental budgets. It's the role of the governing body in making those adjustments. But, it's a city council decision too, is, the role of the budget committee beyond what's required by statute and by local government budgeting law. Some cities have a more standing committee that meet more often for updates and things like that. Typically we go through the process of the budget review and approval, and again, it's up to the governing body to do adjustments after that.
Thank you.
So let's talk schedule.
Yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, so the first meeting we have, I think Tyler has sent these dates maybe already, or if this is the first time.
I sent to the committee members.
Okay. The city council may be interested in these dates too, again, as governed members of the budget committee. Well, for the reason that a couple of these dates, or one date in particular, is a city council night. It's something that we did 2 years ago, trying to take the meeting load off the city council by scheduling one of the meetings during a first Monday. So that might be something that the mayor and the council might have some questions or feedback on as they look at their schedule and calendar of meetings. But right now we have 3 meetings scheduled. I think typically in Sandy it takes about 2 or 3 meetings to go through the review, deliberations, any changes, and then ultimately the approval. The meeting on the 26th is typically the presentation of the budget. So my budget message basically is, what are the major issues? What's the summary of the budget? What are the themes? What council goals were incorporated? And then if the budget committee is interested, I would say we probably start with department presentations, and do most of our operating departments and utilities. That will probably take a couple nights. Sandy has quite a few departments and things that I'm sure we'll dive into. The second night, Monday, May 3rd, would be, I think, a good opportunity to do the Sandy Urban Renewal Agency budget, which is, of course, a separate body than the budget committee. It's a budget committee for the Urban Renewal Agency, so we'll have to convene a separate meeting for that. We can work with the chair on doing that. And then if there is time, we can go back to deliberating the city budget and doing budget presentations on that second night. And then May 10th would be the third meeting, which would be more geared towards any final changes that staff needs to implement, if there is any, and then I should say approval of the budget to forward to the city council. I think here would like to hear if there is any topics or things that you would like us to focus on in the presentation of the budget. If you do want to see each department head give a presentation on their budget and what kind of summary information to provide, that's always helpful for us in preparing and meeting your expectations to make sure that you guys have the information that you need and can make a good decision and recommendation to the council. So happy to talk about that now. And like I said, the council may want to weigh in on the Monday, May 3rd meeting date. Like I said, we've done this in the past, but there's quite a few meetings coming up for the city council in the next couple months. So, Councilor Don Hokinson.
Hey, as far as special topics, we did talk about Sandy Net and making sure that Sandy Net becomes self-sufficient. So I'd love to see that brought up and discussed, you know, not at length, but at least, you know, as we talk about it.
Anybody else? Kathleen?
It's kind of a question for Jordan and Stan. You know, we just got through doing our city council goals, which I would assume will kind of inform or to some extent drive a little bit of the budget process. But what about, is there any intent to kind of do a similar goal setting or revisioning or anything like that for the urban renewal district?
So that's a great question. There is actually, we are looking at having a kind of urban renewal 101 project discussion, study session, financial plan meeting. I think it's in April, right, Tyler? Trying to schedule that. And I think it'd probably be helpful to invite the budget committee to that meeting to at least, you know, watch, if not ask questions and participate. That'll be up to the director or the chair of the agency. But so we thought doing that in April as a work session that would lead into the May meeting pretty nicely to have that foundation.
That's tentatively the 19th of April, I believe, okay. that Monday before the first budget meeting.
That'd be great.
Hey, I have a question or two. Besides the debt load, I think that because I know that we're going to be increasing our debt with the sewer system, possibly some other big categories too. I'd like to sure we talk about that. Secondly, I know in the past we've had the different directors come to us and say, here's kind of some real dreams and goals that we'd love to be able to have the council consider. And I think that really made some sense for me in the past. Wouldn't mind that having happen again this upcoming budget. So, and I'm just one guy out of this one, so I don't know if that would be something discussed from other folks. And then lastly, I am really thinking that in April and May, we ought to be able to be thinking about the possibility of in-person meetings. Some of these meetings get to be pretty hard to continue on, get all the nuances and everything. So if there is a way to evaluate as we go along and the risk gets lower, I'd like to surely talk about that.
I don't know what the current parameters are as far as in-person meetings, but Stan would probably have a better idea of what the current orders from above are for different phases of opening up. I was glad to see that our library is open for limited browsing and perusal starting this morning. But as far as the meetings, I think that's something that's driven outside of us. Jordan and Tyler can stay abreast of that.
Here, Malone. Yes. One thing I would add to that conversation is that it's not always just about us either, right? With these being public meetings and our meeting room only being, you know, so large for capacity reasons, that is a big factor why we've continued online just for public participation.
And because although when you look at the participants, there's not as large a volume of people listening in and observing this as I would hope. But there has to be a way at some point. And to Councillor Exner's comment about the department heads coming and speaking to their budgets and their aspirations for their departments, in past budget committee meetings, I've always found that to be very informative, and especially for we've got 5 or 6, we've got new people on here who would be, I think, well informed by having the department heads come and talk. If it ends up making sure we have to have an extra meeting, that's fine. But I think it brings us back to more of a normal, instead of saying, okay, well, we don't really have time and it's all on Zoom anyway, so we're not going to hear from the department heads as in-depthly as we would if we were doing an in-person meeting. I want to make it as close to what an in-person experience would be, by having the department heads come and speak to their various departments.
That's great. I'll just come on the couple things on the meetings in person. It's a tricky one for us. One, capacity issues. April, May, things are heading in the right direction. I think general population is not slated for vaccination until July. Elected officials, I think, will be earlier. So we'll still have, like the mayor mentioned, a difficulty in being able to have in person with people coming into the room. There's of course things that we can do to try to adjust for that, make people wait outside and things like that. But it'd be hard to get 13 members of the budget committee, staff, and department heads doing presentations, and members of the public all in the same room. So right now, it's still not looking good for having the guidelines be able to allow for that kind of capacity for meetings. Councilor Exner, I think your idea is a good one. It's something that I think we heard feedback on the last budget process. I believe what we're trying to do with this budget is use some of the surplus from our current biennium general revenue to hold that aside for city council and budget committee allocation. Because I'm sure there's going to be things that are on department lists or on your mind. I can't say it's going to be a lot of money. We have things like a comp plan to fund and other things, but there'll probably be a little pot of money to be able to put towards something that becomes a priority.
Okay, thanks.
I envision future city council meetings with the stage down in Meinig Park being set up with socially distanced chairs and mics for all the councilors. And the community can come and sit in the amphitheater-like thing, socially distanced, and have a city council meeting under the stars.
Can we have a band?
Only if the weather cooperates.
I was assuming that we would have the department heads on Zoom and the presentations would be pretty close to what normally we saw in person. Is that correct?
I would concur. I hope that's what we do.
Yes, thank you. Great input. Okay. Well, we are 3 minutes, Chair, we're 3 minutes to 7. I think you probably don't have very many closing comments.
I think we covered everything. Look forward to hearing more about the April 19th Urban Renewal Board meeting, because I'd like to listen in on that. I think it will help and get us up to speed when it comes to the actual budgeting process on the 13th. I think that was the 13th or the 10th. Anyway, so if there's nothing else for tonight's meeting, training session, I think we can adjourn this meeting, right?
Yep.
Perfect. And we're
tonight, and look forward to hearing more information on the various segments going into the actual budgeting process in April. Okay.
Nice to meet everybody. Thank you for coming.
Council, why don't we plan on convening at 7:05?
Okay.
Bye.